Or Section 2, Operation Motive Speed. Do not operate with the locomotive with a higher speed than given the locomotive the data plate with the instrument point with the speed of the network sheet with the wind with the locomotives operating with the antenna with no power with the coasting downgrade with the being towed with the left of the traction motor pinions are removed. 148 precautions before starting the locomotive. Start with the engine for the operator will be thoroughly familiar with the instructions contained within the appropriate WD technical manual accompanying with the equipment to be sure with the engine for the properly lubricated with the operating condition. Check with the position, all manual with the operating valve with the correctness. Check with the engine fuel, oil supply. Check the engine cooling water supply. Check lubricating oil supply. Check anything loose with the under repair with the engine compartment. Check with the accumulation water, oil with the cylinder test valve with the compression release valve. Make sure all the fuses in place. Check with the air supply with the main reservoir. Make sure the brakes are operated with properly with the air press with the reservoir normal. How power is obtained with the engine supply with the mechanical power with the generator with the converter with the electrical power with the traction motor with the auxiliary with each of the engine respect with the generator with the all time with the electrical with the mechanically independent power unit. Control is arranged the opening of the throttle operation position and increase with the speed of the engine with the increase of the power furnace generator that will front home in the furnace with the power with the traction motor with the throttle adjustment will be made with each engine take with the proper share of the load. Start with the engine before operating with the power plant with the operator will observe the foregoing preliminary instruction and instructions that contain with the appropriate with the war department technical manual issue for the equipment to close with the battery control switch to make sure with the reverse handle with the neutral position throttle with the handle the idle position called whether necessary to advance with the throttle beyond with the idle position get with the engine start with the engine approaching with the start button with the respect for the engine observe with the engine shine with the operate properly with lubricating oil pressure build up allow with the compressor the pump with the air until the main reservoir air gauge show with no further increase with the air pressure trim the compressor for the function properly with reduce the engine speed with the idling when furnace pumping up the air. Observe the operation of all the belt drive of the machine with the equipment to make sure the function properly apply with the air brakes to make sure they operate. H. See that the battery is being charged with an indicator with the battery meter. I. If the operating in the cold weather, you with the kerosene heat with the provide warm up the engine before starting with the start of the heater. With the operator will see with the station kerosene within the supply tank. Open the valve with the line between the top of the water heat with the engine water jack. The close of the valve with the engines will operate with the thermostat shove with water circulation radiator light with the wick with the adjust with the clear blue flame with the readjust the wick with if necessary after the heater was warmed up. Wait until the engine turned with the shove with at least 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And temperature indicate with the temp with the start of the engine. After the engine start with the shove off the heater with the close of the valve with the engine cooling system. 151 operating in the locomotive. When diesel electric locomotive is ready to operate in accordance with the foregoing instruction, the engine is operating with the main reservoir fully charged. The operator will relieve the handbrake before attempting to start with the locomotive. Move the reverse handle with the forward reverse position. Advance the throttle handle when the throttle handle is advanced. Turn the control circuits with the energizer will close the line with the contractor establishing connection between the traction motor generator. Increase the current through traction motor acceleration of locomotive to obtain with the advance of the throttle with the change with the steer with the parallel connection with the traction motor established automatically at the proper point. In order to change with the direction of the motion locomotive, the plate with the throttle handle in position, idle engine with the bring with the locomotive to the stop, the shift the reservoir handle with the throttle again, never reverse the locomotive while with the motion, except with an extreme and emergency. Stand over the rails wherever the tendency for the wheels to slip the go with the throttle slightly until the wheels stop slipping. Keep the wheel loose with the grip entirely. Spin, move the throttle into the idling position until the wheels take hold. When coming to the rest of the grade, apply with the brakes to the locomotive before closing the throttle. Likewise, starting when ascending with the grade, do not leave the brakes of the locomotive until the throttle handle has been opened sufficiently to prevent the train of the locomotive from drifting back. When for any reason the current fails on the locomotive, close the throttle handle. If and on the grade, apply with the brakes. Precaution from the operating locomotive that after starting with the engine, the operator will make a regular check for the lubricating oil pressure for the cool water temperature for any of the reason for the engine has to overheat with the all allow engine for the cool up before adding water with the cooling system after the pulling heavy loads allow the engine to idle for 10 minutes before stopping to prevent the boiling for the cooling water. Opening with the adjusting with the engine hood has during the warm weather operation. Brakes and operating brake for the operator will not depend upon the air brakes to hold the locomotive with the grade with the compressor as the shutdown the emergency. Apply the brakes immediately, shut power off afterwards. Apply with the brakes soon with the steam locomotive since the electric locomotive that has much less friction flywheel effect with the motor armature tends to keep the locomotive moving. 154 ventilation engine compartment during the warm weather operation adjustable the hatch cover the engine compartment. The roof should be raised. 155 safety personnel will not reach inside of the frame generator of the motors that are in operation. Leave two of the any or loose objection near the electrical equipment with locomotive the operation one power plant unit only. Locomotive equipped to two power units. The locomotive may be operated any time with one power plant, simply leaving the other power plant shut down while one power plant operates. Special care will be taken to avoid pulling heavy loads to proper precaution if there is any danger of the water freezing shut down the engine. 157 operation with the motor cut out. If the trouble develops, to make it necessary for the cutout with the traction motor shut down with the engine. which furnishes power to the motor. Special care will be taken to avoid the pulling heavy load below tractor motors and operative 158 overheating the engine. Keep the engine overheat. The operator will let the engine idle for 10 minutes before shutting them down. Never stop the engine immediately after a hard run. Circulation cooling water depending on the circulating pump. When the engine is shut down, the pump stop. Also, with the iron method, the engine pulling full load absorb the sufficient heat with the boiling with the cool water in circulation. If the water supply with the fail with the one tube of the cylinder have become normally cooling before turning the water. Watch overhead. Heads are liable to track with the damage if they become too hot when the water is turned into them. 159, stop the engine. Stop the diesel engine. Operator will move the throttle to the extreme forward position, close the throttle valve with a handle, and shift the stick with an open position. If the engine fails to stop under the normal condition, overspeed, close with the emergency shut off cock with the side of the fuel pump. 160, leaving the locomotive. Before leaving the locomotive, the operator will shut down the engine, place the reverser hand with the neutral position, open all switches, close all the doors, windows, and hatches, close the radiator shutters, release air brakes, set handbrakes, and if necessary, block wheels to prevent undesired movement. If the weather freezing, the locomotive can be run with a roundhouse attached to the outside with a steam connection drain water unless the antifreeze is used. 161, temperature control of the cooling water diesel engine provided with a thermostat with cooling water outlet has air fans belted directly to the engine water shuts off from radiator permitted to circulate through the engine cylinder block with the temperature of the water of the engine below the which the thermostat is set. During cold weather, it may be necessary for the close with the shove from the front radiators and over to maintain the proper temperature. During the extreme cold weather, it must become difficult to maintain engine temperature. Proper level of the shove of the inside door also may be partially entirely closed up, especially on the windward side of the locomotive before normal operation shutters will be kept open. When engines are shut down during the cold weather, it's advisable to close all the shove of the control lever of the operating cab with the mark for the shove of the position of the radiator shove. If it becomes difficult to operate with the shove, that may be caused by lack of lubrication at the hinge of the point of the vanes of the operating lever pin with the joint lubricate with light oil. Compressor for the other auxiliary machines. Compressor for the other auxiliary machines are driven by a V-belt with the generator for adjusting the belt tension provided with the moving the machines of the base of the chain with the distance between the pulley center. Fairly accurate guide for determining the correct tension of the belt is to make the adjustment pressing on each belt with one finger to depth of 1 inch of the midway between the pulleys. 1633, battery charging equipment. In general, the function of the auxiliary generator charging generators is to supply us control, lighting, load charging with the battery and the locomotive with more than one power plant with the generators connected within parallel for the battery charging. Battery charging equipment. Each power of the plant consists of the auxiliary generator, belt driven with main generator, voltage regulator, and reverse current relay. 164, engine starting equipment. If this type of the starting with the traction generator due to this motor with the facilitate starting with the XF of the drain with the battery, the generators provide with the shear with the field winding. Main circuit. The main circuit of each of the power plant include the following: equipment, the traction generator with the traction motor contactor connected with the traction generator, the traction motor reverser, changing the direction of the current in the traction motor fields. Maximum engine utilization of the tank with the automatic series parallel connection of the motors to accelerating locomotive. 166, generator field. The shunt field with the supply with the current furnished for the generator itself that must receive it also with the part exciting current from the battery depending on the scheme of the local connections. 167, the simple troubles of locomotives. If the engine fails to turn over the turbo, the button is pressed, the operator will close the battery, control the switches, and control switches. Close the starting contactor. If it does not close, check with the blown battery control fuse. The play fuse is necessary. If the battery voltmeter register for the reading indication of the battery fuse is not blown with the starting with the contactor still, if it does not close, check with the open circuit with the starting button with the operating coil with the starting with the contact with the contractor switch. Starting contactor closed, the engine will not turn over. See with the starting contactor main connection the defect with if the battery is discharged, need with the recharge of the outside source. If the battery is not discharged, the engine cannot be started with the check with the faulty generator with the most likely defect with the proper ground connection, open and loose connection on the main generator circuit. If the engine is operating with the locomotive, it will not move with the throttle in the first position, and the operator will make sure that the line contractors, if they do not close, to look for the poor connections at the following point: interlock the line contactor finger, throttle control switch, contactor finger with the control operating position, interlock with the fingers of the reverser, interlock starting contact the engine starting switches, line contactor operating coils. If the line contactor closed with the locomotive does not move, the operator will release the brake, set the reverser in proper position, see if the contacts in good condition. 3 of the foregoing, see if they do not remove the trouble, the operator will apply with the voltmeter for the see if the traction generator voltage built up. If it does not, there is a probably open circuit with the traction generator shunt field circuit. If the battery does not charge, check with the replacement of the blown fuse the charging generator circuits. Lack of power. Lack of power engine may be caused with poor combustion, insufficient improper fuel leak of the suction line with the generator, trouble the injector restriction exists, incorrect timing leaky exhaust valve with the tight bearing piston, Lack of the power electrical system may be caused by low generator field excitation, which in turn may be caused by faulty connection of the generator battery field switch with a faulty auxiliary generator field contactor. Lack of the power also may result with a faulty traction motor generators. Transition relays, current limited relay, the fuse blown with a battery, the exciter circuits. Smoke and exhaust. Smoke of the exhaust normally indicate the poor combustion chamber. The faulty fuel with the partially burned with condition cover the black exhaust. Fuel is not going. The exhaust bush was blue. Smoke may appear light low upon the starting, and because of the low temperature of the combustion chamber, the master firing improper fuel with incorrect timing, faulty injector, insufficient air. Also, may also cover the exhaust smoke. 168 work reports after completion each of the trip day works of work report with the proof of the form will be formed at the engine formed out by the engine man. Section 3, maintenance of locomotive.